Hey guys, good morning or good evening from wherever you guys are in the countries. Good morning, folks. Welcome everyone to our 8th Aravanai Tamil Leaders Speaker Series. I can't believe we're at the 8th already. That's insane. We have 2 more lined up for this year. And so stay tuned for that. As you guys already know, my name is Valesa and I'm here. I'm the Director of Social Engagement for Aravanai. Boy, am I excited for today's lineup of speakers that we have for you today. Once again, I just want to remind you our mission is to share knowledge to all aspiring entrepreneurs in underprivileged communities and make tech inclusive. And that's why we planned out these 10 discussions throughout the year. And so, as I mentioned, watch out for the next one in November. With that, I'm going to introduce Rajan, the chair of Aravanai, to give us a bit more information again about our organization. Yes, for the new ones that joined.
Thank you, Valesa. Just like Valesa mentioned, thank you all for joining in today. I know it's a Saturday morning for a lot of people in Toronto and elsewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. And then all those people who are spending the evening with us from Sri Lanka. I do appreciate you all joining. And like Valesa mentioned, we have a great discussion today. It's a tech and music intersection. In order to give a background around Aravanai, Aravanai means embrace. What we are doing is to teach people through technology and education and possible entrepreneurship avenues in northeast of Sri Lanka, predominantly underserved at the current time period. We've been in operation in Canada since 2017. And we've participated in things like YAL IT Hub's YAL Geek Challenge and helped some of the initiatives with Uki coding class, which is a 6 months accelerator program in northern and eastern part of Sri Lanka. Recently, what we've been doing is working closely with University of Jaffna in the computing department. We're already, I think, about 10 classes into teaching AWS to the 3rd and 4th year computer science students. And we're strong, partnering with them very closely to influence how these practical skills can be taught to the kids at the university level, so that as they graduate and get into the industry, they come prepared with some of these transferable skills. So that's the highlight I wanted to share with you all. And as always, we are looking for volunteers to help make an impact back home, as well as in Canada. If you are interested, please do join us at hello.aravanai.org. You can obviously find the team details and what we are after on our website at www.aravanai.org. With that said, I do encourage a lot of you here and anyone listening in to join the YAL Geek Challenge 10th season finale that's coming up next weekend. If you go to YAL IT Hub's page, you will see the webinar links to register. It's a huge milestone for YAL IT Hub because it's 10 years since it got started, and the 10th year competition is also coming along. Having said that, we recently started spotlighting entrepreneurs, that came from Sri Lanka, especially through YAL IT Hub's YAL Geek Challenges. Without further ado, I would like to request Gobindran to come on video and share about what their company do, who they are, and what they're looking for from the community. Gobindran, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So can I share my screen? Yeah. Hi everyone. Nice to meet you all, and then thanks a lot for Aravanai and its team to giving this opportunity to me. So I'm a Gopindran Kulendran from Cleanergy, and I am the founder and CEO of QX. I will explain about our company, and then first start with my story. I got exposed to the computers in 2007 in a gaming shop in Kilinochi. So then from then, so I'm very like the computer, and I always wanted to be the computer all the time. So and then I went to home, and then I tried to my mother to buy a computer, but at the time the computer was very expensive, and then we didn't have electricity power. Then I went to Vauni after the war. We moved to Vauni, and then when I get 20 rupees or 30 rupees in my hand, I always go to the net cafes and gaming centers to interact with computer. So from that moment, I started a dream to become a software person and starting a company in Northern Province and become a pioneer. Um, so um, so at that time, my family and then relatives or the community didn't encourage me. They always wanted me to become a doctor or engineer like that. And then the first time when I went to school, when I went to school, there a person came from Yalit Hub, and then he introduced me about Jalgi Chalan Junior in 2015, I guess. So that time I went to Yalit Hub space in Cleanergy, and then there I met Miller and then other mentors, and they encouraged and introduced me user experience and other computer related topics. And then they mentored and then helped me to find out more information on Google and internet. So from that moment, I started to design user experience related following and posting Google and social media. And then I got started to getting freelance projects. And first project was around 1,500 rupees in healthcare. And then so I started to build network at Charlotte Hub, and then I met Alagan, and Alagan, he was a founder of Zero One Tech, which is a software company in Colombo. Then I went there as an intern, a user experience designer in 2017. Then I was working around 1.5 years there, and then I got a good industrial experience. So that was the basement and preparation part. And then and in 2018, I got selected to University of Mortua. Then after I joined to University of Mortua, I quit that job from Zero One Tech, and then started the company because I had a good freelancing network. So first, the company was started as a user experience firm, and then we started to move to full stack development powerhouse. Um, in 2020, I participated at JAL ITHub started a startup accelerator program, and then we raised 75,000 US dollars from a US investor, and then we started scaling up the company. Right now, we have around 20 people, and we started expanding very fast. First we started as a UX studio, which was a user experience firm, and then we uh, moved to a software development powerhouse, and we recently rebranded as UX. I will move to what we do. UX is a user experience driven full stack power development powerhouse, designing and building software applications for startups to enterprises. So far we have delivered 60 plus projects, working with 50 plus clients in 20 plus countries. And These are some of our clients and recognitions. We selected as a best startup in Northern Province by Slashcom, which is a Sri Lankan government agency in 2021, and then we ranked as top software developers and top user experience designers on Clarity. We do enterprise applications, SaaS applications, informative websites. These are our engagement models. We have a dedicated team model, hourly rate model, and fixed cost model. Um, um, we develop web applications, iOS applications, Android applications, and user experience, artificial intelligence, and blockchains based applications. That's it. I had only 5 minutes to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you for that information, Gobi. Now, I just wanted to make sure that audience here, there might be people who you work with in the tech sector, might be a smaller project, might be a larger project. I do encourage you to reach out to Gobi. Gobi, you can share your information on the chat box, how to contact you and where. This is one of the ways that we can help to give back home. Not only does it brings financial stability, it also allows local community to have employment opportunities. If you look at it, Gobi started as a one person, now has more than 20 people employed by the company. I do encourage share the word and maybe some referrals to Gobi, and it could be a good long-term partnership. Thank you so much, Gobi. Now, I'm going over to the main topic of discussion. We're going to be discussing about business development versus corporate development. In order to kick things started, I would like to introduce Ashwini Vasant. She's an engineer. She's a builder. I worked with her. It's rare to see females in STEM programs. When I became a rookie software engineering manager, she was one of my first hires in California. And you rarely see a female engineer, and then you rarely see a female engineer who works on radio frequencies. So Ashwini was a radio frequency driver developer back then. She comes with a lot of telecom experience, Nokia, Palm, and then and a lot of networking experience, including Nutanix, which is a startup based out of Bay Area. Now she's also gearing into an entrepreneurship area. She's one of those early engineers of a stealth mode startup, again out of Bay Area. And then not only does she build things into technical realm, but she also builds things into the social side of things through a podcast series that she runs called Through the Corporate Glass, I believe. I had an opportunity to participate in one of her podcasts. Without further ado, please welcome Ashwini, and thank you for helping moderate this discussion. And I do encourage you to share a little bit more about you if I missed anything.
Thank you so much, Rajan. Thanks so much for this opportunity, and thanks for the generous introduction. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm super excited to chat with Noel Kirtiraj. So I'll introduce Noel briefly before we start the conversation. Noel is, excuse me for that. Noel Kirtiraj is the CEO of Maja, a company he co-founded with the legendary A.R. Rahman, with the vision of creating music as a standalone industry for South Asians. As a technology-enabled label alternative, Maja's mission is to empower the next generation of South Asian artists with complete creative control and resources to attain global reach. As a curious entrepreneur and investor, Noel has incubated and worked with many early-stage technology companies out of Toronto, including serving as the CEO of a deep tech company he built to serve multiple verticals. He's also been responsible for building and scaling large cross-functional teams within multinational corporations like Motorola, Google, Lenovo, and he's built his career over 15 plus years in various leadership roles. As a graduate of McMaster University, he did his double major in engineering and business. Noel has completed his MBA from Schulich School of Business and Strategy. He's energized by the creative community building with talented folks and developing interesting ideas that can make global impact. So when he's not doing all of this, which is a huge list already, he also explores the outdoors, likes to listen to emerging musicians and making a mess in the kitchen. So welcome, Noel. And I definitely share your last two interests.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a long intro. So like now I got to
very
step up my game here.
profile.
Thanks again, and thanks to Aravanai first and foremost. You know, you guys are doing an awesome job. You know, facilitating and running through these workshops and whatnot. So it's amazing to see, and I'm happy to be here. Hopefully, we'll have a good conversation and share a lot of the mistakes I made and prevent others from doing the things I learned the hard way, I guess.
Yeah, we're excited to get started. So we'd like to start out with probably just understanding business development at a high level, not so much from the definition point of view, but just in terms of what business development actually involved, possibly in the context of Maja, if you could.
Okay, yeah, I mean, so I guess, yeah, like a lot of the things I'm going to say, like, I'm sure everyone has their own perspective. So whatever I'm going to share is sort of my perspective and whatever I learned and how I approach things, right? So when I look at a company, you know, typically, like, you know, you come up with a problem, right? And you feel it's worth going after, and you come up with a product or service to address it and kind of prove that there's a need for that, right? So that all that happens at the early stages, and until you have that really, like, you're still trying to figure out what is that you're trying to do, right, as an entrepreneur. But then after that is where the fun starts, where pretty much now taking, you know, a concept or something that you thought would be interesting and really scaling and growing it. So under that growth/scale side of things, I look at business development as things that you would do organically, right? What I mean by that is like any direct activity that you would do to grow your company, right? I would categorize those activities under business development. And then while we're at the topic from in terms of a corporate development, how I separate corporate development from business development is at some point you kind of figure this out. Okay, there's a need for it, and there are people who are willing to pay for whatever you built. How do you now accelerate the growth? And you may make decisions as to, you know, if we keep going at the current pace organically, you may lose out on opportunities. So then you start looking at activities and drivers that will really speed up the growth of the company, right? So those activities I would categorize under corporate development. So again, like, this is sort of my way of looking at it. So in terms of business development specifically, you know, I kind of talk about my prior company, which is more of a business to business technology provider, and then Maja, which is more like a consumer focused company, right? So fundamentally, business development is, you know, how do you get somebody to pay for whatever you built or whatever you offer, right? That's what it comes down to. So sales and sales related, like marketing activities, kind of fall in there. So in my prior company, it would have meant that how do I, you know, as a startup or like somebody who is insignificant, because that company was more B2B. We were selling to large telecom operators, banks, and so on. So you could imagine being in conversations or even try to get a conversation with somebody, and then afterwards trying to convince them, you know, hey, give us a shot, right? So because you would be up against now massive multi-billion-dollar companies or service providers and whatnot, right? So in that case, now how do you, as a startup, it's about hustle for me, right? It's about how do you now convince the other side to first and foremost take you seriously, right? And then once they give you the opportunity, how do you maintain that credibility? And it's half the time it's selling the thing. Like with my prior company, UXplore, I didn't even have a product. I had a slide deck and got a deal done, right? Which is just luck, right? It doesn't happen often, right?
Right.
So I think it's super important, having the conviction as to what is that you're doing, so that when you're in front of a potential buyer, that will come through and you are able to manage the conversation, right? So that's exactly what happened. One of the largest telcos, literally I went and said, okay, here, this is what we want to do for you guys. Just pay me to cover the cost and I will deliver. And then if you're happy with it, then we go from there. And so they took a chance on me. And that was a major break for that company, because once I had sort of a yes from one large client, right, I was then able to take it and sell it elsewhere, right? So you kind of, the network effect sort of happens, but it's having that first break, is super important. So in a B2B space, business development, I would say it's pretty well defined, right? Because companies have been selling to other companies.
Break it down now. So B2B is essentially when you're building for a business versus
Yeah. So
consumer, right?
Yeah. So B2B would be, you are not selling anything direct to the end user. You are selling to somebody who has their own end users. Like, for example, a telecom operator, they have their subscriber base, but they have need for products and services to serve their customer base, right? So that is B2B, versus B2C would be something that directly benefits the end user. So in case of Maja, like we look at what we do, there's like elements of B2B there, but it's primarily more of a consumer focused brand, right? At the end of the day, we create awesome content and hope that the audience connect with it and whatnot, right?
Right. So is there a difference then, Noel, between doing business development for a B2B versus a B2C?
Yeah, definitely. There's like approaches would be different for sure, right? And I would say what to do in a B2B context, selling to another business, the frameworks or the approaches there are many that's proven and well established out there, right? The challenge there is, as a startup, how do you now go execute that, right, up against very well resourced established competition, right? Versus I would say in the consumer focused model, it requires discovery to find that market fit, right? A lot more, I would say, right? And then especially as a startup, chances are you're trying to do something disruptive. So now when you try to do that, now you got to, like in case of B2B, right? The number of customers are like going to be a lot less, right? Versus in case of a consumer focus, is literally every human, really, right? So whoever segment you're going after, you're like dealing with like millions of people. So how do you now test something and refine what works, what doesn't work? So I would say that is a bit more challenging. But then you have less of a hurdle to run those experiments in case of B2C.
Got it. That makes sense. And actually, this is a perfect time for me to interleave one of our audience questions, which fits perfectly in this context. So I'd like to interleave Enosh Praveen's question. And his question is, what was the bet that the initiative, and I'm guessing this is the Maja initiative, would actually reach the masses? Was this just purely based on intuition, or I guess this was exactly around what you were suggesting about how you would need to actually establish a footprint in the B2C market? And
yeah, so I think in anything, right, whether it's Maja or any company that anyone's building, I think conviction is important. Like you got to be very, very sure about why, like it cannot be something that you say, like you truly have to feel it and breathe it, right? Um, so with Maja, like when we looked around and the whole hypothesis and thesis is the industry is broken, right? Um, and it needs to be disrupted, right? And it's nothing, how do I say, like the idea I don't think was anything new. Rather, what we saw was failed attempts because whoever tried to do something, they would have just given it like a very lukewarm, um, approach and tried to like, do things, but then no one really, took it in a drastically different direction, right? So that's what we felt was needed. So for me, like because as I mentioned, I was running this other company and it has its own trajectory, right? And it was in a good place for me to step back. And the opportunity with Maja is like, how do I now disrupt bunch of? It's like it was like the problem space was so huge for me to not get excited about, right? Because for me, like my personality is that I got to, if I'm bored, like then it's very difficult for me to do anything. Like I wouldn't get out of bed, right? So in the case of Maja, like I saw the record labels, like the Sonys of the world, very well established. There's a proven model there, right? Then I saw um, management companies who work with artists, right, and help them develop and grow. Then on the other side, we had live experiences, like people who are curating shows and whatnot. So there were so many of these what I call legacy or traditional industries, very well established practices, and people weren't asking questions as to can things be done differently. So when we went in, like that was number one, I would say, is that we go in, and even now I tell the team, and what we always try to do is like, I don't want to do anything somebody's done, right? um, like for us to really be successful, we had to go against the grain, which means people are not going to understand or not going to be happy about it, right? So enjoy me, when we launched that song, it was no different. So I'm like, the talent is there, right? It's just simple math. You have like, if you look at South Asian, it's like billion plus people. And if you say that 10% of them, would have some sort of a music intuition or something, right? So that's 100 million. Then you say, you know, further, like let's take 1% of it. Now you're talking about 10 million people who would be somewhat trained. Then after that, you could pick 1 million, in my view, world-class talent, right? Except when you talk about the global level, you talk about ARR or MIA, right? These are the two artists that I would say truly had broken through. So the numbers doesn't make any sense. So fundamentally, for me, like I'm going to question every single thing, and we're not going to do anything somebody else did. So, and then we said, okay, what is the problem here? So the creative control, artists not having ownership and things like that. So we said, that's what we are going to really communicate and really push the limit. So when we did Enjoy and Jamie, it was not like a made for work project. So, it was like, okay, like I wanted to do a song because we were curating sort of like a digital festival at the time. So I said, D, do a song. And then we we're working with Ari who also said, Ari would like, it would be cool for you to be on that track. And then we went to Santosh and said, like we wanted to produce it. So, and they were excited by it, right? And then and then once that happened, like those three, they already are like amazing in their own way. But then when they came together, like they took it to another level, right? And then from our part, like we would keep pushing, right? And then like like that song, like Santosh did probably like 40 different versions of it, right? And because for him, even though he was established, like it's sort of like his first true independent song in a big way. So like the level of effort that went into it by everyone involved, the work ethic, and then we were pushing each other, right? Like it's like I would listen to the song and then I'm like, okay, I feel bored at this point. That I would straight up tell this to Santosh, and then he's like, you're right, and here's he would have already done something with it, right? So if you guys remember the song, till the very end, almost close to release, the part that D goes part and put and whatever that verse, right? There's a change that happens, and in my mind, like that's one of the pivotal moment for the song. If he didn't do that shift there, I don't know if the song would resonate the same way because people get bored. So it's subtle things like that. So the artist perspective, they did their part. They really, like I would, in my view, that's the best work of Santosh, D, and Arivu to date, right? Because together, like something special happened. And on our front, I said, okay, we don't want like music videos that's like, kind of cringy, right? So like, if you want to do a music video, like let's do it properly, um, without worrying about how to monetize or whatever. Like it was like literally like, like we're going to do this the right way. And we had the conviction that if we did it, it will happen, right? So it was so I could break it down, right? Like it's like it definitely picked up faster than we thought it would, right? The pace of growth. But going in, if we didn't reach the type of success it is showing, it would have been failure for Maja, right? So for Maja, it's like one of the things we always look at is creating blueprints that others could look up and say, okay, you know what? It's possible, right? So why can't I do it? So after Enjoy Enjoy came about, now, the industry as a whole, right? Like the Sonys of the world, they now started creating music videos. Like there's like, independent song launches happening, which is amazing to see, right? Because that is exactly what we want to do, right? We want to kind of shake things up so that everyone in the ecosystem comes together. Because at the end of the day, it's about the artist, right?
Yeah. No, that's actually perfect. So essentially, it's like concentrate on building the best version of the product, and then
I think like early days. So this is like, I guess, if I were to summarize it, I think as a startup, what happens is you always press for resources, right? Or like how big you could do something, right? So the common mode of operation is you may do something within your capability and limitations, right? Uh, the further you could push that to, like, if you go to say that I have unlimited resources, right? I have no restrictions. What would I do? What is the dream? And whatever you put out, the closer you get to that, which is not going to be easy, right? Otherwise, everyone would do it.
Right.
Which I think is super important from a brand building perspective. So for Maja, Enjoy and Jammy had to be successful, right? And because it was such a core thing for the company from a launch perspective, right?
Yeah. Did you have to solve a discoverability problem, Noel, or like did you have to somehow rally the audience to be able to listen to Enjoy and Jami or the first?
Like Maja has like, it's like, I mean, what you see of Maja is literally like scratching the surface, right? So it's like there's a huge ecosystem behind it, and then there's constant discovery that happens. So for us, when the initial hypothesis is, okay, artists make music, so okay, we got to get the music out to be heard by people. One of the place would be venues where they perform, right? And globally, the number one revenue stream for a musician is when they do shows, right? So then we looked at, okay, for South Asians, like the infrastructure is not there, specifically in South India, right? So the ambition was, hey, we are going to do something where we can work with a bunch of artists, create world-class content, and you know what? People don't have the venues or festivals. We are going to go curate one, right? So then COVID happened, so things got delayed. But fundamentally, that's still the plan. Like we will have a Coachella-like festival out of South India, right? It will happen, right? And it may not happen in year one. Whenever it happens, right? We will create that asset, because once you do that, world will come to us, right? Because what happens in the music industry, right? People don't talk about it, but it's a very broken industry, right? Run by like a bunch of old white men, right? And There's no diversity, no representation, nothing, right? And even to get like a table at the seat at the table, right? It's a fight. So for musicians, specifically a South Asian musician, right? Like you just get crumbs, right? And literally, like it's not fair at all, right? So for Maja's perspective, we are going to create our own space, right? And make mainstream come to us instead of going to mainstream space and say, okay, please, can you feature our artist, collaborate with our artist? We want to do it the other way around. So Enjoy Njami is a good example. We did Enjoy Njami and we were intentional about doing it in a big way. Next thing you know, DJ Snake reached out to us inbound, right? And we didn't have to pitch to him, nothing. Like it was, so that's precisely it is. And then like I had conversation with like Drake's people. I had conversation with like, like we could go to weekends camp, right? And stuff like that. So it's like providing value rather than coming across as, hey, we want to do this, please give us a chance. Like, so we take the chance and then hopefully we are making big bets the right way so that we are creating our own space, right?
Yeah.
So there's discovery, like, so it's like constant discovery, if I would say, right? Even the digital festival thing I talked about is like initially, in South India and for most part of India, they actually have policies against playing independent music, which is like nonsense, right? Like it's like if it's a film song, no problem. But they may have like a token, okay, here's this 1 hour per week where we may play some independent song on a radio or whatever. So we went to Vijay TV and said, okay, we want to broadcast 2 days split, like, about 5-6 hours of content, festival style. We'll give you like high caliber production quality like you've never seen before. You've seen what we did with Enjoy Njami, like, so, right? And they agreed to it, right? So like that itself is a discovery as to, going to a TV channel, right? And then same thing with the radio channel, right? Now there was a time where I would have reached out to them. Like now they reach out to me, like saying, hey, Maja team or whatever, right? Whenever next song is coming up, please let us know and stuff like that, right? But these are infrastructure challenges, right? That won't change overnight. And it's going to be depending on whatever company anyone is building. You will always face that. So that's why you got to think about how do you creatively overcome that, and then which requires, again, you just have to keep trying, right?
Yeah.
So anyone building anything, like you are constantly going to be experimenting, right? The moment you think that you are set, that means somebody is going to outdo you, right?
Yes. Yeah. So this is again an audience question that we have from Pravindan. He asks, what is the secret of your business development? So is there something that you feel worked particularly well?
So for me personally, so I believe every company, the CEO must be the number one salesperson, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there are a lot of elements to a business, right? And then everyone will have strengths and weaknesses. And typically in a tech-driven company, you may have very strong technology founders, right?
Right.
So it's super important. One of the common gap I seen in some company, the team at the core is not diversified enough in a sense that skill set wise, right? So if you are a very strong technology founder, make sure you find another person as a co-founder. Because what happens is, again, like this is about awareness and exposure, I guess. Like when you think about, okay, I need a co-founder, people right away think, oh my God, I got to give equity, right? But things like that are very limited, short-term thinking, because at the end of the day, you could have 100% of something that was nothing, right? Or 50% or 30%, 20% of something that's worth like 100x or 1000x, right?
Right.
To do that, you need the team. So that's probably one of the keys in my view, is that, like at least early stages, a lot of tech heavy entrepreneurs don't develop themselves or surround themselves with enough business savviness. So for me, like it just happened by luck, sort of too. Like undergrad, I don't even know. Like I think it's my parents being Tamil mindset. They're like, oh, this school has this double major, go do it. I didn't even know what the hell it was, right? So out of undergrad, I came out with comp-eng along with like basic understanding of business, right? So that just by luck. I didn't plan it, anything like that, right? And then eventually I got bored of tech and I said, I'm going to go into corporate finance. So when I did my MBA, it was heavy strategy and corporate finance focused. Um, I even worked as an investment banker at one of the banks. So like it just by I did not plan any of this, right? It just happened like in my life where I was able to kind of, I would say, build skill sets um, that kind of rounded me up in a sense where, and all my life I worked as a product person. I was an engineer. So I could sit down with an engineering team, really challenge. I don't write code. I haven't seen a line of code, but I could rip apart an architecture, right? I could have conversation at that level because I enjoy that. On the flip side, like I'm always curious about, okay, like how do I make it creative and make it attractive to sell to someone? So for example, with my last company, there was a typical business model that everyone was following. And I knew I had no chance if I go like that. So I flipped it the other way around. Like I literally, whatever the competition was saying is um, the value proposition, I presented them to be the weakness and what's broken in the industry, right? Because as a startup, right, you have to be ambitious. So like anything you touch, I'm like ripping apart anyone and everyone. And that's how I build conviction myself. Okay, like this is worth doing.
Yeah.
So if you truly are differentiated, if you truly are doing something, you would have the conviction, right? So one, don't be shy about asking for help, surrounding yourself to build that, what do you call it, business sense or business acumen. Two, you have to have conviction. Like if you must be the number one believer in whatever that you are doing, and if you are put in front of somebody, right, you should have the conviction that you would walk away with a commitment or like some sort of a deal done, right?
Yeah.
So those two, these are more like personality and self-growth things. And once those two are there, at least for me, rest of it becomes easy, right?
Perfect. So I guess, Noel, you would qualify as the first biz dev person in Maja then, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, so one other philosophy I personally follow is like when it comes to what we do at Maja, or even my other company, like it's almost like internally you got to have sort of a ruthless um, sense of seeking perfection, or like there cannot be mediocre stuff. Like around me, like I don't want anything, including with myself, right? So because of that, one other thing I always felt I had to do, even early days when I had it just as a team lead or whatever, I want to go do it myself first, because I worked under managers like who kind of just talk stuff, right? But they never done it in their life. And ultimately, it's easy to say stuff to other people and expect them to do it, but you haven't done it, then you may or may not be giving the right guidance, right? So for that, I always, go do it myself, so that I know if I'm demanding something of somebody else, right? It's not like, maybe it's possible, right? I know it's possible. And I would then take it another one saying, hey, listen, like I did it. I'm not even the expert. You know, you are the product guy. You are the, partnership guy. You better do it even better than me, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So for that reason, it's like, that's something I enjoy, right? So for me, it's like, okay, like even my last company, like what drove me was, I know I'm walking into meetings just like me, right? And we're talking about my laptop, like, this like MacBook Air, like that's not even rendering Zoom properly. Versus my competition would have been like a Deloitte's of the world or EY's of the world, right? 15 people would have showed up with like freaking like 200 slides, right? Meanwhile, I'm trying to win the same opportunity, like just me showing up, and half the stuff I'm selling doesn't exist, right? So that's something I enjoy, because to me, like, getting a deal done. And I know that essentially like it wasn't easy, right? And same thing with Maja. Like with Maja, everything we do, it's like constantly climbing mountains, right? Um, and I enjoy that, and I kind of put myself through the challenge, and then that obviously helps also collect my thoughts and gives me clarity as to okay, what's reasonable when I'm setting expedition for others.
Perfect. And how about partnerships, Noel? Is that something which is necessary? It's a necessary part of biz dev, or how do you view
Yeah,
it?
so partnership sort of, I would say, in the middle somewhere there, right? So as I mentioned, like so once you are able to do something direct, you kind of figured out this is the economic model, right? This is how you pitch, right? This is how you kind of understand the pain point of the other side, or whatever value you are bringing, how you articulate it. So you got to do it first. So in my view, you got to do this step first, be able to repeatedly sell whatever you're doing. Once you do that, now from a scaling perspective, is where partnership becomes super helpful. Um, like a simpler form of partnership would be, from a sales perspective, would be channel partnerships, which is very common in sort of B2B, like a business to business environments.
Right.
That could also be a way of breaking through hurdles, because like, if you have like a bank, they're looking at a massive consulting firm or a massive technology firm versus a startup, right? Likely they will go with the safer option, right? Because no one gets fired for like hiring an IPM, right?
Right.
Because like they give a chance to a startup and company screws up, right? So to overcome that, channel partnership could be helpful. Somebody who already has a relationship, right? So basically, a lot of the enterprises, they have these MSAs or like a licensing, like enterprise-wide licensing agreement and so on. And you may already have companies that sold into them. So you just tag along with them, right? So now all of a sudden, you basically say, hey, I'm just going to add a layer to whatever you guys are doing. When you pitch, present this as well. And then if the opportunity materializes, we'll do like a revenue share, something like that, right? So it is super effective from a B2B perspective. And especially if you are selling into, so when you look at business to business, right? You have the large tier one enterprises, and then you have like small, medium, entities, which are like hundreds of thousands of them exist, right? So as a small company, it's very difficult to scale and sell across, because these companies would be geographically all over the place and so on.
Right.
While you may have a channel partner who has a footprint. So if they see value in what you bring, it's an easy way to get, navigate that.
Yeah.
And then even in the other case, like in consumer side of things, because one of the challenge with consumer focused startups anyways is you may have to discover the business model, how you're going to monetize and so on. These days, like end user hardly pays, right? Like a lot of the stuff people just get it, right? So so now in that case, the monetization side of things, you may have need for partnerships, right? So in our case, for Maja or anyone in media and entertainment, brand relationships are huge, both for the artists we work with, as well as Maja as a company, because the whole industry is driven by brands, because these brands are interested in getting in front of the audience, right? Yeah. So that requires some sort of partnership either with the brand or maybe through an agency that works the brand and so on. But that comes sort of like the second part, right? So you got to first prove whatever you have and you are able to directly deal with it, and show that, because you bring a partner, you got to teach them how to take your product now and present it and represent it the way you would, right?
Right.
So unless you've gone through that, it's very difficult to do that experimentation there.
Got it. So the first phase you would say is go it alone and then try to establish some kind of footprint. Right?
Yeah, because I think it's a discovery process, right? Just the same way you do when you have the problem, you came up with a product and you iterated on it and come up with an MVP and you're kind of adding to it, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that you are solving the right problem the right way and so on.
Right.
So the next stage is like, so for any company, there's two risks, right? One is if you're a tech company anyways, you have the technology risk, because there could be a lot of ideas, but are you able to execute it and show that it works? Once you do that, it's the market risk, right? Meaning, are there people willing to pay for it? So that discovery has to happen before you could even articulate um, why whatever you created makes sense, right? So I think it definitely, and also even from a channel partnership, like they would look at you and say, okay, like what have you done? So a lot of the channel partnerships, they would require whatever you done, that customer base, whatever case studies you could show them, because even when they go knock on the door, they got to show some proof point. So
Absolutely. So, is there some kind of spending or expenditure which is involved when it comes to business development? And does that
yeah, for sure. Like, okay, so that's a very good point, actually. So I spend, like, because of the pandemic, it's different. Um, I used to be out like every freaking night, right? It's like, after a while you just get exhausted, but you still have to do it because, especially on a business to business side of things, people get bombarded for meeting requests all the time, right? And it's very difficult to get meeting within the official hours. But it's very easy to say, hey, let's go for dinner, let's go get drinks, or I'm going to take you to a basketball game, or like whatever.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, they are incentivized to, make time for you, right? So for that purpose, it's the entertainment of prospective clients, right, to build the relationship. Um, so yeah, definitely, obviously, when you're out having dinner and whatever, like that costs money. So you need to have some, ability to kind of cover that, right? Or you got to be creative about finding ways to entertain people or meet people and um, do that in like a more like cost-effective fashion, right? So, but by the time you get there, hopefully you have some proof, right? And hopefully you have some investors or whatever that support you, right? Because a lot of the time investors want to help you scale, and they would look to see that whether you figured out what is that you're doing and how you're going to sell it, right? So often the investment comes in to help with scale anyways. So there's definitely that. So that is, again, you doing it, right? And then of course, as you become a bit more mature, um, you have to build a sales team, obviously, right? And again, depending on what you're doing, like there's proven structures, and good salespeople are not cheap, right? So they, even though they are typically incentivized by whatever they bring to the table, like they're still a baseline expense. So yeah, so it's not something you could avoid, but hopefully you position yourself such that you get the backing of people by the time you're going to cross into any significant spending.
Got it. And is there some significant challenge that you faced, Noel, that you'd like to share? Something which makes public.
There's always challenges, and that's what I look at as opportunities, right? Like if you wake up and things look good, you should be worried, right? Because you know what I mean? Like then, unless you like work for the government or something like that, or like something where like things take a long time to change. Like in the world we live in, presumably like entrepreneurs of some sort, right? It's the uncertainty that is going to be there every day, right? And it's always like, so this is one thing again for me, like to stay sort of sane. Like there are days that, I remember like, getting like the very first massive deal done, and I was like on top of the world, right? But then next day you may wake up and something could be on fire, right? So and then you feel like, oh shit, like we're gonna go bankrupt now. Like, what are we gonna do, right? So you will have that sort of extreme swings. So one thing I sort of constantly tell myself and the team is that it doesn't matter what we do, like try to stay in the middle, because never get too excited because you got to win, because you got to get to work tomorrow, or don't be disappointed because things look so bad, right? Because believe that we will bounce back, right? So I think from a team perspective, I would say there are a set of challenges we are making sure, because early days of a company, right? You need to make sure that people that you're with, they all see eye to eye. People have, unless you kind of knew them for a long time, there's that discovery and kind of making sure that the whole unit is moving in the same direction. And then external facing, there's always going to be challenges. Like, for example, in Maja's case, people are out to get us, right? Because we are like, every day, like we do something, it's intentional about, messing somebody else up. So, and the industry is full of bullies, right? So it's like for us, like, but that's what drives me, right? I'm like, bring it on, right? So I look forward to that. And I think you need to be motivated to face these challenges. And essentially, when you do that, then once you overcome them, you feel good about it and it's going to drive you further.
Perfect. So I'm going to take one question from the audience at this point, and it's about what does it take to build a successful record label? And this is Lark asking the question.
So first and foremost, we don't consider Maja to be a record label, right? Actually, I hate that term, right? I know it's easy for people to visualize, right? Um, uh, Using that because obviously it makes it clear what is that. So we look at ourselves as a management first company who provide label like services, right? Because how we go about it is nothing like a record label. Like it's like ultimately we tell the artist you keep 100% of your masters, right? You could walk anytime. We don't lock people into deals and stuff like that. So these are like sort of an anti-label, like opposite of what a label would do, right? Because I approach Maja like I approached any other tech company, like a SaaS company, where you got to earn the loyalty of your customer, right? If you keep providing value, they're going to stay with you. Otherwise, they're going to leave and look elsewhere, right? And I think it's super important when you have an ambitious vision, you essentially are vulnerable like that, right? Like it's so easy to give a contract to an artist because Maja has a name now. We've proven a few things. Like we could go do like a label like deal and people will sign up. And there are so many people approach us and say, you guys keep the full rights. We just want to work with you. Like, so like it's like that. But ultimately for us, we want to do all this without that hook, right? And the uncertainty that comes with it. So I would say it's about people at the end of the day, right? And relationships. So artists first, when we say it, we mean it, right? Like there's nothing that we would do to compromise that, right? So at the end of the day, that is super important. So it's important to have like values and ethos that as a team you truly believe in and it kind of resonates anywhere you go. So when it comes to Maja, whatever we do, I think that's a fundamental part because if you don't do that, the artist would leave us. That's one, right? On the other side, I would also say like, if you have conviction and do the right thing, everything else would work out, right? Example, I'd use Enjoy and Jami, right? If you approach it like a typical label or like from a overthink and say, okay, this is how we want to monetize it and this is what we're going to invest, we wouldn't have done the project, right? Yeah. But then it was a much bigger play for us, right? So I think that's the other thing where like, be clear on why you are doing something, right? So in case of Maja, we are very intentional about a lot of stuff. And that is also important rather than just following the pack. So we are kind of intentional about doing the right thing for the artist and how can we execute around that and then stay true to our obligations, right? So I don't think there's any magical answer as to, because I mean, Maja as a company, we've done some things. We are fortunate to have received the type of reception, but we have a long way to go. Like I'm not I cannot come and tell you here right now how to run a successful record label or anything because we haven't done it, right? So one day, maybe 3-5 years from now, maybe I will revisit the question.
Perfect. So before I actually switch into taking the live Q&A, I had one question to kind of wrap up our discussion. Do you have any specific skills? I know you mentioned that, having business knowledge along with technical or along with some subject matter expertise would be a great way for a CEO to go. But anything else that you think people can do to hone these skills? How should they build it?
Yeah, so I think it's super important. Like one thing I tell my team and myself all the time, like you got to remind yourself whatever that you need to know and whatever you know, there's a huge gap, right? So you have to take that view of lifelong learning and like never be satisfied with what you know, right? Because that's probably one of the most dangerous things or dangerous feelings, right? So in general, it doesn't matter what topic, what area, like always be curious, right? Because once you're curious, you'll find answers. Then once you have answers, right, then you'll be able to like solve things and you will be successful in whatever that you're doing. So that's super important. Second thing is common human trait is to avoid things that we are not comfortable with, right? Like we all have like strengths, right? Every single person has a set of strengths. Every single person has a set of weaknesses. So coincidentally, like this is a topic that I was chatting with a few people about, and I was posting on Instagram about this too, where like I like to understand people, including myself, right? And there's this assessment called Myers-Briggs.
Yes. Yeah.
16 personalities, right?
Right.
So like, I even incorporated that as part of the hiring process at my last company because sometimes we just don't know ourselves, right? And it's not that you do this and it's going to magically tell you who you are, and it's like literally, but at least it kind of will highlight things that you may overlook, right? Because I think when it comes to learning, one of the common pitfall of people is that you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? So it's like one of those things where like when you do these kind of assessments, you kind of would tell you, okay, these are your strengths, these are the areas of improvement and so on. Hopefully that just gives you that top of mind feeling that, okay, you have always had to be learning, right? So, like I learn different ways. Like one, I like to talk to people. Like I like to just interact with people. And then I am very open about sharing what I know, what my experience is. And similarly, I, listen and try to make sense of other people, right? That's one way of learning. Another way would be in terms of when you do like projects or something like that, right? So for example, like we were talking about this earlier, I love to cook. It's just something that, okay, I just do like for fun. But for me, it's like, it started as almost like a challenge where like whenever I ate something, or like if I remember eating something, I used to go back and try to recreate it without looking up any recipes, right? Just purely based on what I remember smelling and tasting. That was just a personal time pass thing for me, right?
Right.
So having like what I mean, it doesn't help with like business necessarily, but I'm saying like in the like let's say if you are a developer or a coder,
right?
Don't limit yourself to what is in front of you that you have to do. Just constantly be trying out different projects and experiments and stuff like that, like outside of what you are supposed to be doing, right? And that's another way to kind of keep up with stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then workshops like this, right? Obviously, right? There are now like there's probably more information than we could consume, right? So I think it just comes back to, are you curious? Are you hungry? If so, you will figure it out, right?
Awesome. That was fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing all of those points. I'll now switch into the Q&A. I'll start with the questions which actually came in as part of the RSVP. So Yusuf basically asks, it's interesting how your first few artists released on Maja have Sri Lankan roots. Is there a specific reason for that?
No, I mean, it just happens to be coincidental. So our ambition is to work with all South Asian artists and even non-South Asian artists who have audience that are South Asians, if I make any sense, right? But then at the same time, that's a massive, massive wish, right? So we got to start somewhere. So since ARR is Tamil, we said, okay, let's focus on Tamil primarily. And then it just happened like, for example, we are in Toronto right now and there's a significant Sri Lankan diaspora, Tamil diaspora here. So we kind of met up with some of the artists and we knew of them, right? And then similarly, like D also, we just happened to meet these artists that just happened to be Tamil and some of them happened to be of Sri Lankan origin, right? That's how they are still. And then we work with a bunch of artists and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens and everyone is, at their own journey, right? Doing their things. So as projects materialize or whatever, then we will roll it out. So like a lot of it is just coincidence, I guess, that it worked out that way.
Okay, perfect. The next question's from Rajan about when you should actually think of investing in a dedicated biz dev person.
So as I mentioned, like first, as the founder CEO, like you should feel confident that you could repeatedly sell. Right. And what that means is from elevator pitch to like literally you got to map out the buyer journey to a point. Okay, like the initial pitch, what is it? Once I get the meeting, right? It's almost like math, right? Like sales becomes like people think sales is like all fluffy, but it's not. Like there's a lot of science to it, right? That's why psychology is super important, right? Like, like there are even tools like on LinkedIn that would tell you like the personality profile we talked about. Right. Like will tell you the personality of the other person so that you could adapt your pitch and everything, right? So you got to go through that full journey and you should be able to do it repeatedly, right? Once that happens, you would have figured out, okay, this is the target market, right? And then within the target market, who is the buyer persona, right? And based on the buyer persona, you would have figured out how the conversation should go. What are the typical, rejections that they give you? How do you overcome that? So literally this is like a sales playbook, right? So you kind of have this, in my view, people would have it in their head, but you got to have it now somehow outlined so that somebody else is able to pick it up and literally sell like whoever the founder or CEO of the company, right?
Right.
So I would say that would be a good spot to then bring in at least someone who is like a BDR or somebody like, and again, you're working closely and then fine tune the process further. And then by doing this, you're also going to be generating some revenue, which will also support the cost, right? So yeah, hopefully that answered the question, Rajan, or you could call me later.
Perfect. So we have one from Niruban, which is very interesting. It's about how can our culture remain authentic, yet evolve in what's becoming a marketplace where culture is the biggest brand asset?
So I think culture is unfortunately something you can go buy, right? It's not, it's basically culture is what just happens, right? Because of the people that are come together, right? So that's why I think it's important as a founder or CEO, you got to have a view on what the core values you stand for, right? And some of the things that are non-negotiable, right? And then that should start with the co-founding team. And then as you bring in people, early days, that's why I was telling the example, like at my last company, like one of the final stages, we would get people to do this personality test. One, we knew our team holistically, what the aggregate strength and where the holes were. So now if you're bringing somebody in, we always try to bring in people that could fill areas, right? Not just from a skill set perspective, but also personality type perspective. And then also you could also identify like if somebody is totally opposite, right? The fit won't be there, right? So I think if you're conscious about it, you would build the core team with the values that you want the company to represent, and then they would propagate it, right? So I mean, the Google, for example, right? Like even though they're massive, how they operate. I mean, Amazon and so on. Like Rajan could like talk about as well, where like certain elements of culture is like retained because it's in everyone's DNA almost, right? Top down. And that just happens because we're intentional about it.
Perfect. So Kavitangi actually asks, is there, tell me some points about how to be a perfect IT professional and any methods to kind of improve skills.
I mean, yeah, like I don't know perfection.
I know you spoke about curiosity.
Earlier, right? So I think, yeah, like to me, it's like whether you're a perfect or not, like you had to define it yourself, right? Because I don't think like somebody else could tell you who you are or whether, So I think that's something, if you are curious and you set your own standard,
right,
you would probably exceed what anyone else is going to expect of you. And as I mentioned, specifically from a technology perspective, I would like highly encourage doing projects beyond your initial scope of work. Read a lot, right? Like for example, like early days, I like stuff like Stack Overflow. Even though I wasn't writing code, I would go to, when there's like some design discussion happening, I would overhear it and I would go to Stack Overflow and see what people are saying, right? Similarly, if I hear a word, like I would wouldn't want to be embarrassed, right, in front of my team. So I would kind of go, okay, what is this specific word they're talking about? What is this framework, right? Like, like what is React.js and all that stuff, right? So I think it's curiosity is probably the number one thing, and you just feed your curiosity and never be satisfied. Like always wake up knowing there's a lot more that you don't know, right?
Absolutely. So there is one question. This is more Maja specific. It's from Sanjeevan. The question is, will Maja help independent music, basically to create independent music videos, and how?
Yeah, so I think there were a few. I saw that there were a few questions on general Maja operations. So I kind of like high level address it. So you guys could always like reach out to me or reach out to like hello@maja.com is basically the email that goes to the full team, the core team anyways. So somebody would look at it and respond, or you could reach out to me as well, like noel@maja.com. So if any questions that's not answered about Maja, you could do that. In general, what we do is we look at artists and we work with them in different capacity. So we have a set of artists we call sort of core artists, where we work as a 360-degree basis, like we do everything, right? And we literally work them through everything from their branding to like distribution to like even when they're working on an album or a single, right? Like giving them the resources and input. But then we work with another set of artists who we are probably not sure if we could help, but we may see potential, and then we may say, okay, let's work on a project by project basis or whatever, and then let's learn about each other and then see like how we could do more, right? So depending on who we are working with, we do all sort of projects, right? So there's the element of the artist obviously creating the music, and in some cases we kind of support them there as well. Like let's say somebody who just has a home studio and they need a professional studio, or like they recorded it maybe they need help with mix and mastering or whatever, right? So from a creation perspective, we help there with the sound. Same thing with video production as well. If it's a project that we are working together on, then definitely like we work with them and help, because we have our own production teams in different places. So if the project makes sense, they will get involved. It's like Enjoy and Jammy, for example, right? Like we did the production, right? So yeah, we do all that. So, and then in general, like one thing, like I guess I've been meaning to at some point like talk about it. So maybe today is the day. So whoever's listening is the lucky bunch. So one of the biggest challenge I see is in India or among South Asians in general, right? The film industry has really corrupted people's mind as to how to create stuff, if I make any sense. Because in the movie scene, what happens is, like the producer would bring on like a composer, and the composer would like bring on a bunch of people to sing. They'll bring on somebody to write, right? And then the music gets created. Then on the screen, you have, Vijay or Ajit dancing to the song, right? So now all of a sudden you have a person who just purely sang, somebody who wrote, somebody else did the production, and somebody else on the screen. Unfortunately, that mental model is still there with a lot of musicians because that's what they saw and got used to, right? But in my view, to be successful as an independent musician, right? Of course, there's exceptions, but in my view, you need to be able to write, right? You need to be able to perform, and then you should be the one on the screen, right? So there are a lot of projects that people approach us with where I would follow the typical movie style model, right? Where essentially the artist is just singing. Somebody was asked to write the lyrics, and then the music video, they would have some actors and actresses, right? So that is something that we hope will change. And the other thing is like, none of this will happen overnight, right? Like writing is not easy. Like, so somebody who's never written, you're not going to be able to pick up the pen and start writing like overnight, but you have to start somewhere. So maybe you co-write something, or like maybe you come up with the core of the concept and get somebody else to flesh out the lyrics. So whatever it is, right? So like a lot of the projects we get, like I would say like 90% would literally be like a movie style model, which we would just give them the feedback. Like this is not something we would work with, right? Another challenge we see is, again, because of the movie style model, whoever the music composer or producer would own the rights, and then the artists are paid to perform. So for Maja, one of the core ethos is artists should own the masters, meaning, if there's one artist or two artists, then and a producer, we expect them to have ownership on the final product, and they should believe in the project enough to do it without getting paid, right? So these are the things we look for. Like for example, if you look in the West, right, like Beyonce or Jay-Z, like they put out music, they write their stuff for most part. They may have a team that helps them, but they still, the core typically comes from them. Very rarely you may have like Rihanna, maybe one exception where you have like a superstar who does minimal writing, right? But most artists write their own stuff. And that's a skill that needs to be developed. And for the artists we work with, we try to emphasize that. And then the ownership is super important, because there's no reason for Maja to exist if you're going to encourage the behavior of existing industry practices. Because our view is we can work with every single artist for every single project, but let's say we work with an artist together, hopefully we could do something bigger than they were previously able to do, but then the artist should benefit from it. And how they will benefit is if they own their own catalog of music. And if people are doing music and handing the rights over, even if you get a hit at some point, you have nothing to really um, monetize and benefit from because you don't own your own rights, right? So it's a very complicated industry and a lot of like nuances there, but fundamentally, like, yeah, like, reach out to us, we're approachable. Um, and, wherever, specific feedback will be given, will be given. And we are not like one of those people where like either if you say no today, that doesn't mean we never will work with you. Um, and then also you got to also understand, like as I mentioned, right? I believe there are 1 million people who are the equivalent of the Beyoncés of the world that are South Asian, right? So, so the expectations we have is like high, and the artists we work with, they also they challenge that, right? Like I used the example of D or Santosh, right? Like they would like say their stuff is like garbage, right? Like they will work on like 30 versions, and they will then like I don't know, D for example, like she did something and whatever, then we were like, she calls me and goes, okay, no, I don't want to release this. I want to go back into the studio. And that's the kind of people we like to work with, because we need that. We need world-class quality to come out. And everyone, there's no shortcuts. Like everyone needs to really put like 200, 300%, then something magical could happen, right? So when we work with somebody, like we are not easy to work with. Like this is not like, some exam or like a homework assignment. You like write something, dates due, and hand it over. Like you will get ripped apart. It'll be given feedback. And then we also take our responsibility seriously, right? So anyways, in general, like, just email us, and I'm sure like there will be more questions or whatever. Like, so when Maja stuff, just email us. Add me on Instagram. Like I'm very active on Instagram, right? So if you find me, add me. So I do my best to respond as much as possible directly.
Perfect. I think that's great. And actually, it almost sounds like you act like an incubator, right, Noel? If I were to draw an analogy into the
100%. So
tech industry.
a lot of us come from, like in the team, we come from heavy tech background, from an incubation type structure and so on. So we look at artists as entrepreneurs, right? And what we are trying to do is essentially turn them into their own brands and enterprises where they are the CEOs, and Maja becomes sort of the extension or the leadership team, right? So you are absolutely right. So there's a whole, just like a tech company needs to find product market fit, right? With the artist, we kind of go through a similar process, right? Because a lot of people could sing. Like I asked the question, describe your sound to me, right? Because it's a discovery process, right? Like you should be able to describe your sound without reference to somebody else, right? It's like, what product are you building, right? Like if you say, we are building, I don't know, Zoom, then I'm like, okay, Zoom is already there. What's different about you, right? So same way, like, we kind of take that approach, and then we test it out with different audiences and find the core audience, and then make sure that we found the right audience. Then we scale and blow it up, right? So we do business development, corporate development at the artist level, right? So like, just like a company may go acquire another company or merge with another company or joint venture with another company, with an artist, we will look for collaborations, right? So it's a lot of parallels for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was a very insightful conversation. And even though I'm in the tech industry, I think I could learn a lot in terms of like parallels with the music industry. And it was a great conversation. Thank you so much for this.
No, thank you so much. And as I said, right, like, I know it's super early for you as well. Like I think people don't realize that it's just 8:30 a.m. for you, and you've been up like even earlier than that. So really appreciate that. Thanks again to Aravanai, and thanks everyone who joined in. Hopefully you guys found some use in it.
Yeah, thank you so much to Aravanai, and over to Vidyarasa.
Hi. Before I let you both go, I just wanted to quickly introduce one of our social media partners that were an amazing backbone for us from day one with all our social media campaigns. So I just want to quickly introduce Articulate before do the final send off. So Articulate, Enosh, are you here?
Hey, thank you so much, Vilirsan. I feel really privileged to go after Noel. It's like I got free content without even paying. This is amazing. But Noel, this is amazing, and really thank you so much for all what you're doing. I think there's so much of artists here, and there's so much of talent that needs to be taken out to the world, and you guys are doing an amazing job. So just to give a quick introduction about what we do, we are a tech media platform, and what we do is something similar to Maja. We take local entrepreneurs, we take their stories and all their initiatives, and we take it out to Asia. So at the moment, we are doing it regionally. Hopefully, soon we will go global. So right now, that's our mission. We're taking local entrepreneurs regional, and happy to help initiatives like the Aravanai series and the YAL IT Hub, and we are definitely looking forward to the YAL finals, which is happening in November. So all the best, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, Noel. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, you guys. I know I was like waking up with all my notification like constantly, like you guys doing an awesome job. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Noel.
No, thank you, Enosh. As I mentioned, you guys were from day one amazing with all the support. So very grateful for that. And last but not least, Nolan Ashmi, that was one of the best conversations I've heard thus far. Thank you so much. You truly did hone down not only on corporate versus business development, but you gave us a lot of insight about music industry and Maja. You shared a lot of nuggets. No, you don't even understand. This was amazing. We would also love to thank you guys for taking time in your busy schedules to doing this. Last but not least, we'd like to also thank our social media partners at this time. So Articulate, you're an amazing partner for us. We have Tamil Culture supporting us. Also, all the Canadian Tamil Student Associations and CTPA. Last but not least, we would like to thank the entire audience for writing down your questions. I think this was one of the most questions that we've ever received. So thank you for that. We tried our best to include them in this discussion. If not, don't worry. We will have written responses for you in a written post sent to you via email, and hope to see you guys again for our 9th discussion in November. So see you then. Thank you so much.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
சின்ன கொண்ட சிங்க மண்ணுக்குது காலமர